These materials work. This information works. There is something called truth. And when you leverage it into someone's hurting life, you can fix the hurt. You can repair damaged nerve endings. You can give them the right track to run on. And anybody who wants to, anybody who applies correct information, who applies truth to their life, will improve in the area in which they made the application of that truth. Are you with me? And these 8 F's, those are the channels through which we do it. There's a 9-year-old girl who was being raised in Sicily between World War I and World War II. Her father was a small-time merchant, and he made a deal with the prince that lived in the palace on the hill, the last prince of Avignon. And he traded his daughter to the prince for a horse. The little girl would cry in bed at night in the palace, and she would sneak out and steal a horse, and she'd ride through the valley and go to her dad's little shack and walk back in the middle of the night like she'd never left and crawl in bed with her little sister, and they'd sit there and cuddle and just cry. And the dad would find her in the morning, throw her in the back of his pickup truck, and drive her back up to the palace. And this happened tons of times. She finally deals with the pain. She grows up in the prince's home. He's a benevolent man. She becomes a gorgeous young woman. Everybody's whispering about why the prince must have her around. She finally asks the prince now. She's a young woman of her own. She knows how the world works. Her innocence was gone long ago when her dad disowned her so coldly. And she and the prince get into a conversation, and she says to the prince, "Did you buy me from my dad for illegitimate reasons? Did you raise me to be your mistress?" And the prince was shocked at her bluntness, but he knew the question had to come sooner or later. He said, "No." He said, "My father was a giving man, and being the wealthiest man around, people would bring him unwanted babies and orphans all the time, and they'd stick them through the fence, they'd put them through the gate and leave them there in the morning, and my father would take them all in. But by the time he died, most of the family fortune was gone, and they asked me to marry a rich countess to keep the family fortune going. So they arranged a marriage for me, and you know my wife, and she would never allow me to take in any children. So when the babies were put through the gate when I was the prince, and the orphans were brought to us, I was not allowed to keep them in my own home. But I would always take them to the church, and I would set up a secret stipend, and I would take care of them no matter how much money it cost. And I'd check up on them and send them little presents and try to give them my love. But never," he said, "have I ever seen a grown man in perfect health with a thriving little business merchandise away his 9-year-old daughter." And my wife, even my wife, was cracked by it, and she said, "We'll take her in." And then he turned it on her and he said, "How did you process this in your head? How have you not become embittered? How have you grown up and blossomed and flowered? And how are you so bright and so alive? How can you shine so brightly when this how did you process that when you were 9 years old? Your own father did that to you." She told him this long drawn out story, and she mentioned this guy named Signore Brassini, Mr. Brassini. And she said, "It was once I saw Mr. Brassini in the fruit market one day that it all came together for me." And he said, "Well, who is Mr. Brassini?" She said, "Well, there he was in the fruit market with his wife. And I saw him reach up with both of his hands and touch each side of her face ever so gently, just kind of cupped her face in his hands. And he kissed her right on the lips, right in front of the world. And they laughed, and he put his arm around her, and they were giggling and cuddling, and they walked off arm in arm and kind of sashayed out the fruit market. And I watched Mr. Brassini cherish and love his wife. And I realized the problem wasn't with me, it was with my dad. I tried everything I could to replace my dead mother. I tried to cook like she did, and I tried to clean like she did, and I tried to be good like she was, and I tried to say nice things to him, but whatever I did was never good enough for him. It was nothing but anger and hatred out of him all the time. Cold, heartlessness. And I thought that's how the world worked, and I thought it was something wrong with me. That's all I knew. It was the only world I ever saw. And then when you bought me, you can imagine what I thought of you. But then I saw Brassini, and I realized my view of the world that I'd been shown wasn't true everywhere. That there were men who were kind, and there were men who were good, and there were men who would cherish and love and idolize their spouse. And I grew up to realize that you, Prince, are a Brasini too. And I decided I was going to be a Brasini, and I decided that I was going to find a Brasini for myself. Now, the reason I tell you that story is because that's what we do through the 8 F's. You may have grown up in a home and you were abused. You may have a heartbreaking story to tell that could rival that 9-year-old girl. You may live in a home right now and you're terrorized by your spouse. You may have this cracked view of how it is to live because all you've ever done is looked out of a broken window at the world. And I'm here to tell you, it's not supposed to be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way, and it's not your fault if it's happening. But all we can do is show you the straight line so you realize it doesn't have to be that way, you don't have to be that way, and it can stop with you. You can start it right, you can make a straight line, and you can be a Brasini for somebody else. That's what we do through the 8 F's. Maybe it's finances. Lori Woodward's pretty open with the fact that she was raised and told that being in debt is just the way it is. You're never going to make it anyway. You might as well get in debt and enjoy it. Just get used to it. It's how the world works. Here's your credit cards. Here's your car payment. No big deal. Live it up. Maybe you've been taught that same kind of financial training. Maybe you've been taught that it's normal to have a 30-year mortgage. Maybe you think it's normal to have car payments. Maybe you think it's normal to be in debt. Maybe you think interest payments and stuff. Maybe you think that's normal. We're going to show you a Brasini effect of living debt-free. We're going to show you a Brasini effect where you can make so much money, it's not in your fights in your marriage anymore. It's not in your decision-making anymore. That the things you do with money are to try to bless people. How can I give more? How can I make more of an impact? How can I give more away? What other causes can I sponsor? We're going to show you a Brasini effect when it comes to finances and let you know it's not supposed to be that way. You're not supposed to be a slave to your money. Your money's supposed to be a slave to you. And we'll show you a straight line against your crooked line. And we could do that with all the 8 F's. That's the life business.